breech block instead of the T254E1's horizontal sliding breech block. Until American-made barrels could be obtained with comparable accuracy, British X-15/L-52 barrels were to be used. US-built XM24/L-52 barrels, 218.5 in, 5,550 mm in length, fitted with an eccentric bore evacuator were used for the M60 series starting in June 1959 but retained interchangeability with the British X-15/L-52 barrel. All of the US guns and XM24 barrels were produced at the Waterflyet Arsenal, NY, and the gun mounts, M116 for the M60 and M140 for the M60A1/A3, were manufactured at the Rock Island Arsenal, IL. Because the evacuator was positioned lower on the gun's barrel, US M68 guns were fitted with an eccentric bore evacuator instead of a concentric model in order to provide more clearance over the rear deck. The M60-81 gun shares the same firing characteristics as the M68. It featured several design improvements including an updated gun hydraulic configuration, a stabilization upgrade for the gun, a gun elevation kill switch for the loader, improved ballistic drive allowing the accurate firing of long dart penetrators and other component refinements. The gun is capable of using a wide range of ammunition including APDS Tracer, APDS-T, M392 and M728. Armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot tracer, APDS-T, M735 and M774, APDS-depleted uranium, DO, APDS-DO, M833, Heat FS, M456, APDS dummy and target practice rounds, high explosive plastic, HEP, /high explosive squash head, HESH, M393, white phosphorus and canister rounds. Barrels with thermal sleeves were used starting in 1973. Both the original M60 variant as well and the initial configuration of the M60A1 used the M68 gun. Additionally, many M48A3s armed with a 90mm gun that were in service with the Army National Guard, ARNG, were retrofitted with the M68 gun during the mid-1970s and redesignated as the M48A5. This was done to maintain training levels of ARNG units as well as using a commonality in ammunition amongst tanks. M60A1 Rise, reliability improved selected equipment. Passive tanks built after 1977 and all M60A3 tanks were armed with the M60-81 variant of the gun. It had an improved ballistic drive to allow for accurate firing of the M735 APDS ammunition. Most M60A1 Rise tanks were retrofitted to this standard by applying the M735 cam update from the M60A1 PIP turret update kit. Armor, edit. Composite armor made with fused silica glass sandwiched between plates of steel were intended to be fitted to the hull. This led to a redesign of the front of the hull into the shape of a flat wedge, instead of the M48's elliptical front, as it simplified the installation of this armor. It was also envisioned that the T-95E6 turret was to be constructed solely with this special armor. The U.S. Army Ordnance Tank Automotive Command, ATAC, and the Carnegie Institute of Technology began development of the armor in November 1952 at Fort Beaver, VA as Project TT2-782/51 using examples of the T-95 tank to conduct the ballistics testing. This composite armor provides protection against heat, HEP/HESH and HE rounds. However, field-repaired panel castings suffered a loss of kinetic energy protection. Limitations in manufacturing capacity and the added cost led to this armor being dropped by November 1958, and all M60 series tanks were protected with conventional steel armor, but the tank retained the capability to employ armor panels. The M60 was the last tank to feature an escape hatch under the hull. The escape hatch was provided for the driver, whose topside hatch could easily be blocked by the main gun. There were two versions of hulls used for the M60 series. The M60 hull had a straight slope and beak compared to the earlier M48's rounded one. The hull bottom had a strong boat-like appearance with a pronounced recess between the upper tracks and external suspension arms, and one shock absorber on the first rotor wheel pair. The armor was improved, at 6 inches, 155 millimeters, on the front glasses and mantle of solid rolled homogeneous armor, while it was 4.3 inches, 110 millimeters, on the M48. The first prototype hulls did not have shock absorbers and were briefly named M68 in late 1958 before the Ordnance Department renamed it the M60 in March 1959. This hull version was used only on the original M60 variant and early M728 combat engineer vehicles, CEVs, and M60 armored vehicle launched bridges, AVLBs. This hull model was in production from 1959 to 1962. The M60A1 hull has basically the same visual characteristics. The noticeable difference was the addition of a second shock absorber at the second rotor wheel pair, and was also accompanied by a slight relocation of the first return roller. These modifications were needed due to the increased weight of the M60A1 turret as well as the additional hull armor. This hull model was used on the M60A1, M60A2 and M60A3 models of the M60 series, as well as the M728A1 CEV and M60A1 AVLB. It was in production from 1962 to 1983. The M60 series went through a progressive turret design scheme during its production life, with 4 different turrets being manufactured for the M60 series. The T95E5 turret used on the M60 was hemispherically shaped and bore a strong resemblance to the M48 pattern. The M60A1 was the first version to employ the newly designed T95E7 turret with a redesigned bustle, increasing the number of rounds for the main gun to 63. The M60A2 featured a specially designed turret for the M162 gun forward/missile launcher that greatly reduced the frontal arc in comparison to the M60A1's T95E7 turret. The M60A3's turret was similar to the A1's but with increased armor protection for the frontal arc and mantlet in an effort to provide additional protection of the turret's hydraulics system. M19 Commander's Cupola, edit. A redesigned full-vision cupola was envisioned for the commander's station. It had 7 tiltable vision blocks arranged to give the commander a 360-degree field of view with overlapping vision between adjacent vision blocks. The front vision block could be replaced with a dual-power M34 750 binocular day sight or an M19E1 infrared IR periscope. A special feature was that the cupola body could be raised up to 3.5 in, 89 mm, providing the commander a direct field of vision while remaining under armor protection. Access was through a hatch cover on the roof, and a .50 caliber M2 heavy barrel HB machine gun was pedestal mounted on the forward part of the cupola. It could be aimed and fired with the cupola closed. Also there was an 11 in, 280 mm, long hydraulically operated port on the left side, allowing spent cartridge cases to be ejected. After creating a full-sized mock-up of this design using the T95E6 turret, it was dropped in favor of a design based on the M1 cupola of the M48A2's turret. This T9 cupola provided the commander with more headroom than the T6 cupola of the T95 tank, carrying a new short receiver M85/T175.50 caliber machine gun, and it was standardized as the cupola, tank commander's caliber .50 machine gun, M19. The first M19 cupola, a modified T9, was ready on the 27th of October, 1958. It has an M28C sight for the machine gun in the forward part of the cupola and 8 vision blocks. The front vision block can be replaced by a M19E1 infrared periscope or an M36E1 passive periscope for night observation. Initial production of the cupola was problematic. The first 300 M60s produced were armed with a .50 cal M2HB machine gun in a pedestal mount welded to the left side of the commander's cupola owing to production problems with the new M85 machine gun. Of these tanks, the first 45 manufactured were made without the cupola itself, also due to production problems. All of these early M60s eventually had the M19 cupola and M85 machine gun installed. Compared to a conventional pintle mount, the remote-controlled M85 machine gun was relatively ineffective in the anti-aircraft role for which it was designed. Removing the cupola lowered the vehicle's relatively high silhouette. The cupola's hatch also opened toward the rear of the vehicle and was dangerous to close if under small arms fire owing to a lock-open mechanism that required the user to apply leverage to unlock it prior to closing. The commander was able to observe the battlefield using the X4 binocular M34D daylight vision block or the M19E1IR or M36 passive periscopes while remaining under armor protection with a 360-degree traverse independent of the turret, was stabilized in azimuth and elevation and carried 600 rounds of ammunition. All M60s in U.S. service retained the M19 cupola until the tank was phased out of service. The few M60A3s in Army service as training vehicles had their commander's cupola removed as it was deemed unnecessary for training and to better mimic the profile of Soviet tanks. Some M48A5s were retrofitted with the M19 cupola to maintain training levels of ARNG units. Main Battle Tank Designation, edit. The concept of the medium tank gradually evolved into the Main Battle Tank, MBT, in the 1960s. The MBT was to combine the firepower and protection sufficient for the assault role with the mobility to perform as a medium tank. The MBT thus took on the role the British had once called the Universal Tank in the late 1950s. Exemplified by the British Centurion, filling almost all battlefield roles. Typical MBTs were as well armed as any other vehicle on the battlefield, highly mobile, and well armored. Yet they were cheap enough to be built in large numbers. The first generation consists of the medium tanks designed and produced directly after World War II that were later redefined as main battle tanks. These were exemplified by the M47 and M48 patterns armed with a 90mm main gun already in widespread U.S. service. The original variant of the M60 series also fulfilled the definition of a late first-generation MBT, sometimes being referred to as an intermediate second-generation design. The Soviet T-54 and T-55 as well as the original configuration of the T-62 tank designs are also regarded as first-generation MBTs. The second generation had enhanced night fighting capabilities and in most cases nuclear, biological and chemical, NBC, protection. Most Western tanks of this generation were armed with the 105mm Royal Ordnance L7 tank gun or derivatives of it. Notable are the British Chieftain and German Leopard 1. The United States fully committed to the MBT doctrine in 1963 when the Marine Corps deactivated its last M103 heavy tank battalion. The first American nomenclature-designated second-generation MBT was the M60, a one version of the M60 series. The term MBT is used in strategic doctrine and the composition of force as determined by the United States Army. The M60 series tanks fulfilled the MBT role on a strategic and tactical level. It was never referred to as such in any official training or technical manuals. The first Soviet second-generation main battle tank designs were the T-64 and T-72. Production versions, edit. XM60 development, edit. By May 1957, it became clear that the T-95 medium tank would not have a significant advantage over the M48A2. The X-shaped motor and electro-optical rangefinder were both discarded due to performance, and the accuracy of the smoothbore gun and its high-velocity APDS ammunition continued to be unsatisfactory. The T-95E6 turret was to be made with the advanced silicas armor but was never constructed. All this led to the closure of the T-95 project on the 7th of July, 1960. But the T-95E7 turret design using conventional hardened steel armor was carried forward, becoming the M60A1S turret. The course of the M48 Patton's tank production was the source of widespread congressional debate. The Bureau of the Budget believed that the Army was not progressing with sufficient speed in its tank modernization program and recommended the immediate replacement of the M48A2. Correctly predicting that Congress would not approve the procurement of the M48A2 after the fiscal year 1959, the Deputy Chief of Staff, Logistics, XLOG, proposed a tank based on the M48A2 featuring improved firepower and the AVDS 1790 engine. Since the main gun had not yet been specified, 4 XM60 weapons systems were submitted in September 1957. The first concept was armed with the 120mm gun T123E6 in the long-nosed T95E6 turret. This was the design preferred by the Ordnance Department. It was fitted with a mock-up of the new designed full-vision commander's cupola. A full-sized prototype of this turret was constructed before this concept was dropped, mainly due to its slow rate of fire. The second carried the 105mm rifle T254E1 main gun in the T95E5 type turret and the T9 cupola style of the M48A2. The T254 guns used British X-15/L52 barrels with a concentric bore evacuator on the barrel. The Army Ordnance Technical Committee chose this design for production in August 1958. The third concept was to mount the 90mm T208 smoothbore main gun and the T95E6 turret with the T6 cupola of the T95 tank. It never progressed beyond design drawings. The fourth used the T95E1 turret and the T208 main gun. A mock-up was built using the new Vision cupola. All of these conceptual designs were referred to as the XM60. A contract was awarded to Chrysler Engineering in September 1958 for the Advanced Production Engineering, APE, of the XM60 concept #2. The T95 hull was considered, however its one-piece front casting was too difficult and expensive to produce in quantity. Some existing T95 hulls were refitted with the AVDS 1790 engine and used from 1960 to 1964 to develop the T1181 prototyping of the M728 combat engineer vehicle. Instead, the decision was made to use modified M48A2 hulls. The hulls had 3 return rollers and 6 steel rotor wheel pairs per side with no shock absorbers, using only bumper springs on the first and sixth rotor wheel arms, along with a widened turret well and ring, and a flat wedge-shaped glacis. The T254E2 gun was chosen to be the main weapon of the tank in August 1958, being standardized as the M68 105mm gun. After a briefing on the 11th of December 1958, General Maxwell Taylor ordered the XM60 into production because of the improvements it offered in firepower, protection, and cruising range. Since the tank had not yet received its official designation, these prototype hulls were briefly referred to as the M68 in December 1958 until they were officially named the M60 in March 1959. Fulfilling this requirement was an interim tank design that resulted in the M60 series, which largely resembles the M48A2 pattern it was based on, but has significant differences. The visual similarity of these designs as well as their overlapping period of service has caused some sources to informally name the original variant of the M60 as a pattern tank. M60 Series, Edit. The OTCM, Ordnance Technical Committee Minutes, #37002 officially standardized the type as the Tank, Combat, Full-Tracked, 105mm gun, M60 on the 16th of March 1959. The production contract was approved April 1959 with the low-rate initial production starting in June at the Chrysler Corporation Delaware Defense Plant in Newark, Delaware. Production Pilot 1 was completed at Chrysler Defense Engineering on the 2nd of July with an initial production total of 45 tanks in July 1959. These tanks were sent to the Aberdeen Proving Ground for survivability testing and final design modifications. This batch of tanks did not have the M19 cupola due to its initial production problems. Production Pilot 2 was finished on the 4th of August and used to develop technical publications, and an additional 47 tanks produced to complete the first low-rate production buy. In August 1959, an engineering bid package was awarded for the second low-rate production buy of M60s to be built at the Delaware plant. Production Pilot 3 was completed the 2nd of September. These tanks went to the Detroit Arsenal Test Center for maintenance evaluations. They were then sent to Fort Knox for user trials. The fourth pilot was completed on the 26th of October and was used as the master hull to verify production standards at the Detroit tank plant with a low-rate initial production total of 180 M60s built in 1959. Subsequent production, starting with the October 1960 batch, were built at the Detroit Arsenal tank plant in Warren, Michigan. It reached operational capability with fielding to Army units in Europe beginning in December 1960. Features. The original variant of the M60 series ultimately was produced as a quick-fix engineering (QFE) upgrade of the M48 due to the Soviet Union's tank advancements of the late 1950s and the delays from developing the Silica's armor and an improved turret design. The M60 mounted a 105mm M68 main gun with the bore evacuator mounted towards the middle of the tube, carrying 57 rounds in the clamshell-shaped turret style of the M48. 9 rounds were stowed in the left side of the turret bustle behind the loader. The remaining rounds were stored inside safe containers on the hull floor. A new short receiver coaxial machine gun was designed for the M60 tank. This was the 7.62mm M73 /T197E2, which replaced the .30 caliber M37 used on the M48A2. It had 2,000 rounds of ammunition. They had a reputation for jamming. After working to correct this, they were redesignated as the M73A1 in 1970. The electrical package on the M60 was essentially the same as used on the M48A2C, including an improved turret control system and an all-metric measurement M16 fire control system, FCS. The M16 FCS consists of a new M10 ballistic drive and mechanical M16E1 gun data computer which integrated barrel temperature data with an M17 coincidence range finder. The rangefinder is a double-image coincidence image instrument used as the ranging device of the gunner's primary direct sighting and fire control system. The gunner is provided with an M31E1 day periscope with a magnification of x8 and an M105D day telescopic sight with a magnification of x8 and a field of view of 7.5 degrees. Range information from the rangefinder is fed into the ballistic computer through a shaft. The ballistic computer is a mechanically driven unit that permits ammunition selection, range correction, and superelevation correction by the gunner. The ballistic drive receives the range input and, through the use of cams and gears, provides superelevation information to the superelevation actuator. The superelevation actuator adds sufficient hydraulic fluid to the elevating mechanism to correctly position the gun. In late 1962, a kit was fielded that allowed the use of the IN/VSS-1, V1IR searchlight. The searchlight has both infrared and visible light capabilities and was positioned over the gun. Along with an M32IR periscope for the gunner, M19IR periscope and M18IR binoculars for the commander provided first-generation night vision capability to the M60 and M60A1 tanks. This kit was also compatible with the M48A3/A5. The hull bottom had a strong boat-like appearance with a pronounced recess between the upper tracks and external suspension arms with cast aluminum rotor wheels and return rollers along with a single shock absorber on the first rotor wheel pair. Cast aluminum road wheels were used to save weight. The armor was improved, at 6 inches, 155 millimeters, on the front glasses and mantle of solid rolled homogeneous armor, while it was 4.3 inches, 110 millimeters, on the M48. Power was provided by the AVDS 1790-2 engine, CD850-5 cross-drive transmission and the T97E2 track assembly as used on the M48A3. The drive sprocket is located at the rear of the hull. The vehicle also provides full NBC protection for the crew using the M13A1 protection system, creating a positive atmospheric pressure in the crew compartment. The positive pressure keeps contaminated air out and forces the smoke produced from firing the main or coax guns out of the vehicle. Access between the driver's compartment and the turret fighting compartment was also restricted, requiring that the turret be traversed to the rear. The M60 was deployed to West Germany to counter the threat presented from the T-54S and T-55S of the Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact, as well as to South Korea, but was never sent to South Vietnam, mainly due to unfavorable terrain and the general lack of significant numbers of North Vietnamese armor. In May 1961, Army Chief of Staff General George Decker announced that the European Command had been receiving the M60 to replace older tank inventory. By October, the 7th Army was outfitted with many of the tanks. A total of 2,205 M60s were built between June 1959 and August 1962. Some M60/E60 tanks were later transferred to Israel and participated in the Yom Kippur War. Some were repurposed as AVLBs. M60A1 series, edit. Development. The program to develop the M60A1 was approved in early 1960 in conjunction with abandoning further development of the advanced composite armor and the closure of the T-95 medium tank project. The first proof of concept attempt to mate a modified M60 hull with the T-95E7 turret took place in March 1960. The turret, even without the siliceous cord armor, provided improved ballistic protection. Additional space for the turret crew was also made available by using the M140 mount, thus moving the cannon 5 inches forward. The first two prototypes, Pilot 1 and 2, were ready in May 1961 and the third, Pilot 3, in June 1961, when the vehicle also received its official prototype designation as the M60E1. These vehicles were built by Chrysler Defense. Pilot 1 was sent for evaluation at the Eglin Air Force Base climatic hangar, while Pilot 2 was tested at the Yuma test station, and Pilot 3 underwent field trials